What does true timing disruption look like? On today's video, I want to show you how ActivArmor does that exactly by completely disrupting the traditional sequence of getting a cast. Let's get into it right now. All right, here's what you're looking at. This is ActivArmor. You can see right here on this kid and this doctor right here exactly what the product is. I don't have any interest in this. I just think it is a cool sequential timing disruption. This is kind of exactly what you think it is. It's a splint and cast for wrist breaks and arm breaks and things like that. You can see a number of different photos in here, some different patient stories. We'll get into a little bit of that detail in here, but what's important to understand it in terms of disruption is taking a look at this from a timing perspective. So I put together a little Figma board to show us that. Okay, what we're looking at here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. This is standard kid kind of stuff. I had a couple of kids myself. My wife and I would push them out on bikes and doing things like that, and they would inevitably fall sometimes. It happens. Kids are kids. Adults are adults too sometimes. And you get some sort of a break. Okay, you go to the doctor, you get an x-ray, the bone is broken. Okay, depending on the swelling, might need a temporary splint, something like this. And then finally, when the swelling goes down, after you've immobilized bone, now you're going to need a cast. Then once the cast has been on a certain amount of time, you go to the doctor and they take that cast off with scary saw. This little girl here is having a nice time looking at that, but it's kind of terrifying. If you think about it, it's loud, there's dust, it's kind of gross. It's really scary for kids especially, but it's none too pleasant for adults either. During that time, they take the cast off, and sometimes some kids think it's cool that their skin looks like a dead person under there, but often you can get some real irritation and swelling under a cast like that because you can't really clean it. It gets no airflow. You know the drill. And then finally, you may need to get a splint again until the bone finally heals. The cast might come off, but you may need another splint. And then finally, you get back to the point where you're back on the bike again, or you're back in the pool again. So this is the standard process that has been used literally for hundreds of years in order to splint and repair bones. This is really what ActivArmor took issue with and said, you know what? We got a better idea on that. All right, the second thing we need to look at is this is the patient sequence up here. But the second part you have to look at is what is the clinical sequence that goes along with that. You can't just look at the patient experience. You need to look at the clinical experience that goes along with it. So what's happening here is you have to map that out. Okay, here are the steps the patient goes through. What steps does the clinician go through? Now, I've seen some of these things for witnessing broken bones from my kids. This is DME, durable medical equipment. These are the codes for getting these splints if you need one at Walgreens or something. But if you get one at the doctor, they code it. There's a reimbursement code for those sorts of things. That is critical for all clinicians are thinking about how they are going to get reimbursed for that. Because if they're not, or if there's no code, it all goes through insurance. And what does your insurance say? All of this is a critical part of the clinical workflow that as the parent of the kid, you are definitely seeing. So there's a couple of things. The splint has a code itself. Applying the splint has a code. There's a cart. I've seen this cart. This is a cast making trolley. You can zoom in on that a little bit. You've got some of the materials. They've got like little dishes of water. It's kind of like arts and crafts time. If you've ever seen this done, it is exactly that. They wheel this cart in and they start doing arts and crafts time. Hopefully you've gotten a little bit of pain medicine, but it's kind of interesting to see it done. And then finally, there is when you have the code for doing the actual cast itself. Depending on how big of a deal that was, they all get coded a little bit differently. And then finally, you might go back to another splint and another splint application here at the end. So again, You got to understand these two workflows. And for your invention, your product, whatever you're thinking, this is a critical exercise to do. Just map out not only what the customer's experience is, but if there's another service provider involved, map out what their experience is. How are they getting reimbursed? What products do they need in order to complete that for the customer? Because there are opportunities to innovate on both of those value chains. And we're going to take a look at how ActivArmor does it. What we go down here, let's take a look at what this particular kind of combination 3D printed cast and splint does. So again, same scenario here. Little kid fell off the bike, broke his wrist. Got it. Sad situation, but it happens. Kids are kids. What ActivArmor does is they 3D print that in the clinic. So you go to a clinic, and if it's got one of these machines and it has their technology, the clinician can print you a combination splint and cast in one that is made out of this polycarbonate material that replaces all of these steps. And I want to talk about that. It replaces the splint, replaces the cast. No need for this. So bye. I'll just delete that. Gone. Don't need to have scary saw. Don't need to have the nasty skin because you can actually get water in there. This kid's going swimming. You don't need this anymore. You don't really need this anymore. So you don't need that. And think about this at the very end. Like this kid here in the picture, you can get back to that as soon as the wrist feels like the pain has gone down. So if you're in week 5 of 6 of this cast being on, and like, yeah, it's basically healed, I feel good, and I want to be active again, you can be active again. You can get it wet, you can shower, you can clean it. All of these sort of things really add a ton of value for the patient. Awesome product. Now, the downside, if there is a downside, does take some changes to the clinical workflow. Now, remember, we had all of these codes. They were all really well established because they've been around a long time. Well, there's new technology to bring in, and clinicians tend to be pretty slow to adopt certain things. And this is where some of the friction can come in the process, and why ActivArmor goes through so much detail to help clinicians through this process. So in the clinical workflow, instead of yes, there's still an x-ray, yes, there's still, that kind of diagnostic, but instead of arts and crafts time, it's tech time. So they're busting out the iPhone or some sort of dedicated device. It scans the area here, and the scan gets translated into a 3D printer. That arts and crafts cart is not free, but it's something that people have bought before. Might it cost $8,000, $9,000? Probably not. I don't know what those cost anymore. But the 3D printer for this type of application might cost $3,000 to $8,000, somewhere in there. So you need to be planning for that sort of expense as part of the clinical workflow. There's also materials cost and insurance costs and things like that. The bigger issue is, and something that all medical innovation faces, every single one of them, whenever you disrupt a workflow that's got reimbursement codes tied to it, one of the critical things you're doing as part of your marketing strategy is thinking, how can you get a procedure code written for this? Because if there's a code to bill it against, it removes so much friction from the process. I suspect that ActivArmor is deeply engaged in that and may have even gotten some codes done. The AI models that I use say that hasn't happened yet, but I hope for their sake that they have moved through that process. There's no specific code for that, but you're essentially hijacking other codes in this. So there could be a gap between what the reimbursement is and what the cost is in the clinical workflow, and you have to work through that and make sure that you are addressing that with the patient up front so that they could pay out of pocket or they could make other arrangements. What's important, though, is when you show the patient all of these sort of details, and you could get rid of so many of these steps, and they need to pay some additional modest fee on top of what would be a standard cast, the decision seems pretty easy. So when you're thinking about your invention, your innovation, what did we learn here from ActivArmor? Obviously, number one, map out your customer's workflow. What are they doing right now? How will your product interrupt that flow? Does it add a new step? Does it remove steps? Does it change the nature of those steps? And don't forget, if there are people who are supporting your customer during that process, make sure you understand their workflow as well. Because one of the issues in medical device innovation, as well as financial product innovation, all kinds of different areas, defense products, when you don't think about kind of the clinical workflow, it's going to slow adoption. Patients love it, patients want it, but if the clinician sees this as something they don't really understand how to do, or they don't have the equipment, or they don't know how to bill for, patients are going to have a very difficult time finding a clinic that's going to be able to serve their needs. So, what is your experience? How is your product getting mapped out? What did you learn that was most insightful about what ActivArmor is doing that you can use for your invention or your innovation? Drop those notes in the comments, and maybe on the next video, I'll feature your invention. Until then, I'll see you on the next one.